So excited to continue our sermon series on Secrets of a Mountaintop Marriage. I grew up watching cartoons on Saturday morning. Some of you probably did too, and remember the best ones were like Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd, and then my favorite were the Coyote and the Roadrunner. All right, anybody watch those before? Okay, just out of curiosity, this is like a personality test. Who was on the Roadrunner side? All right, okay. Who was for the Coyote? All right, we got a special small group for you, okay? We're bringing in somebody, specialist. I like the Coyote because I like the underdog, even though his motives weren't always that pure, I'll grant you. But how many times can somebody get run over by an Acme truck? I mean, seriously, how many times can you fall off the same cliff, right? How many times can you blow yourself up with a do-it-at-home kit, right? I remember one of the episodes where the Coyote was trying to blow up the woodpecker. I'm getting my cartoons mixed up. That's Woody. The Roadrunner, he's trying to blow him up, and he sets a trap with dynamite because they had lots of dynamite back then, I guess. I don't know. Always had some dynamite. And of course, the Roadrunner was watching him from a distance do this. And so the Roadrunner runs up and grabs the dynamite and looks at it and then hands it to the Coyote right when it's about to blow up and then goes, what did he say before he left? Beep, beep, right. And he's gone. Big cloud of dust. And you can just see the Coyote's expression, right? He's looking at it like his eyes are really big. And there's a cliff wall on this side and a cliff wall on that side. He's like looking around. And of course, the only thing he could think of to put it out was he swallows it, right? And he eats it. And I was thinking about that this week because this sermon series on marriage is kind of like, for me, eating a stick of dynamite. Because God has laid this topic and this issue on my heart so heavily that I feel like I'll explode if I don't share with you the things that God has been sharing with me. Because I see in the lives of our community, I see in the lives of our world, many of you see the desperate need for us to learn the truth about marriage. And there's no place to learn that from except from the person who made it up, the one who designed it. So a couple of weeks ago, that's where we started. We started with the definition of marriage, which is very countercultural. Throw out everything the world might tell you in images and songs and movies. Go all the way back to Genesis chapter 2, and you see the need that God perceived in us was that it's not good for us to be alone. That's not my words. In Genesis, God says it's not good for man to be alone. So obviously God had visited somebody's bachelor pad, right? And had seen the truth of it. Had seen the pizza boxes and the undescribable things in the sink and said it's not good for man to be alone. That we're naturally dirty and unkempt and need help. And God decided, okay, everybody actually needs help. And so he said, it's not good for man to be alone. I'll make for him a partner, all right, to be his helper. And that was the perceived need that God saw in humanity, that number one, it's not good for us to be alone. We're not at our best when we are alone. When we're left to our own devices, oftentimes we regress to the mean, and the mean is not a very good thing in humanity. Our natural broken state, we regress to the mean without the accountability or the ability to see ourselves reflected. Our true selves, as I said, is reflected in the tears of our spouse. A spouse is a wonderful and painful instrument of self-discovery. And that in the tears of your spouse, you see your true self. And we don't want to see that. We don't want to see the truth, but you know what? God loves the truth. And he loves for all that junk to come boiling up because he's like, I can work with that. I can work with that. When we deny it and hide it and put on our little costumes and our church faces, God can't work with that. But the real nitty-gritty, dirty stuff of life, God's like, I can work with that. God's like, I do my best work in cemeteries, right? Ask Jesus, ask Lazarus. I do my best work in cemeteries. Our God's a God of resurrection. And so we were learning from the beginning that we're created to be a helper to one another. And that helper was revealed to us the truth of what that looks like in Jesus. You remember, he didn't have to wash the disciples' feet. In fact, they didn't really want him to. He wanted to. So he got on his knees and washed their feet. And we see what being a helper looks like. We see servanthood. So we worked with that to learn that the definition of marriage, if we had to define what it is something that's freely entered, fully committed. Divorce is off the table. That's not in discussion. Freely entered, fully committed, Christ-like servanthood to another person. Now, you find me a movie that talks about that, I'll watch it. Freely entered to, fully committed, Christ-like servanthood to another person. That's what we learned it was about. And then when we have that gift of someone to do life with, we began to learn, well, how do we protect that love that we were given that brought us to the altar to be married? And tons of research shows that what hurts or puts out or dampens or corrodes or erodes that love more than anything is explosive conflict. And so we looked at that very carefully last week. If you want to watch the sermon, it's on our YouTube channel or on our website. But we looked at how explosive conflict over time erodes those feelings of love and admiration and respect. And that's important. But that brings us to today of how not only we protect something from putting that fire out, but how do we stoke that fire? How do we add to that as part of our journey towards that mountaintop marriage? And that's what I want to talk about with you a little bit this morning. Marriage is a unique thing. Unlike any other relationship, rarely do we stop to reflect on it, which is weird because it determines our happiness. If you're married, probably more than anything else, your happiness or unhappiness comes with the day-to-day life and the tussle and the struggle oftentimes in marriage. But we enter into it pretty unreflectively, don't we? When we come to marriage, we have had some experience with relationships. Think about it with me. If you have your hand out, look at it. You've had some relationships. You've had family. Your first relationship's your family, maybe your parents, your siblings. And over time, you learn how to navigate that relationship. What are the realistic expectations you should have on family, the roles that you play with one another? What are those? You learn those over time. Later in life, you have friends. And that's a little bit different, right? Different levels of expectations, different kind of rules apply to friendship. And then later in life, maybe you have a romantic relationship, and that's a lot different, isn't it, than your I hope it is. A lot different than your family relationship. Depends on where you grew up, probably, but a lot different. Romantic relationship, different rules, different expectations. Then maybe one day you have a roommate. Maybe you go off to college, you have a roommate. Hey, there's some unspoken rules there about what goes on in that, what that person should do, even though they didn't do it probably, but what they should do and what you should do. And then maybe later in life you go to work. You have colleagues, you have a boss, coworkers, business partner. That's a different kind of relationship, different rules apply, right? And each of these has its own template that is unspoken mostly, that you know that this is in limits and this is off limits. This is how you relate to a coworker. This is how you relate to a friend, family, romantic, coworker, roommate, 5 different relationships. You enter into marriage, something happens. Without realizing it, you see that marriage, unlike any other relationship, is this weird hybrid of all 5 of those relationships, and that you have no template that works when you put all those things together. Suddenly you have someone who is family, who is friend, who is romantic partner, who is roommate and business partner because you have finances together, and you stumble into the reality that you have no pattern, no rule book, no owner's manual for how to navigate that. And the way you stumble in that is you suddenly feel this despair, you feel this frustration, you feel like you're banging up a wall. This isn't what I thought it would be, because you and we bring the wrong template to it. We think, well, if I act like I do with a friend, that'll work, or like I did with a girlfriend. But what I would suggest to you is that marriage has its own owner's manual, all right? That this hybrid relationship is nothing like its constituent parts. It has to have a whole different rule book, whole different owner's manual, right? Just like the owner's manual for your weed eater will fail you in your airplane, right? Try to apply those 2 things together, you know? If you have a weed eater where you mix the oil and the gas, try that on your Mercedes or your Honda or whatever it is you have. It's not going to work. You got to have a whole new rule book to apply. But we don't ever even stop to think about that. And when I do premarital counseling with folks, they couldn't be, with the exception of anybody who's in the room right now, they couldn't be less interested in that relative to flowers and dresses and food and everything else. The one day, for some reason, is much more important than the whole life. So we have to be more reflective on the nature of the relationship that marriage is. And so I want to suggest to you that one of the things that's a part of that owner's manual is what I like to call the iron law of marriage. The iron law of marriage. And I say iron because it's more mechanical than it is moralistic. It's kind of a it is what it is sort of thing. And you can run yourself up against it if you want to and be broken by it, or you can accept that it's real. Spiritually, from a psychological standpoint, empirically, that this is it. And it's so easy. It's just 3 words. So I want you to really tune in for a moment. Here are the 3 words. You ready? Iron law of marriage. You ready? Just nod your head if you're ready. All right, I want to make sure I've got you. Okay, here it is. Needs get met. Needs get met. Not they should, not they shouldn't. They do. And we're going to think about what does that mean a little bit. About 400 years before Jesus was born, a wise man came into the world. And really a lot of things we're learning today really affirm things that he discovered and kind of realized just out of his own brilliance about 350 years to be more accurate before Jesus. Somebody named Aristotle, who was a tremendous observer of the natural world. And one of his favorite things that he would say that science 1,000, 2,000 years later is like, oh, he was right. We thought we discovered this. He said something that is still so true in the natural world and in the spiritual world and the emotional world, wherever you want to look. Here's what he said. He said, nature abhors a vacuum. And what he meant by that is that nature, the reality that we inhabit, hates, rejects a vacuum. That where there is a vacuum, it will be filled. Or as I like to say it in 3 words. What were the 3 words you might remember? Needs get met. Nature abhors a vacuum. If you look up a scientific definition of that, you'll find that it's put this way, which I think is interesting, just a little bit of a different take on it, is this. This idea, nature abhors a vacuum, is used to express the idea that empty or unfilled spaces are unnatural as they go against the laws of nature and physics. All right? You don't have to you could go to a science class and read that. Nature abhors a vacuum. My way of saying that is needs get met. And that having a mountaintop marriage means learning and accepting the kind of mechanical nature of that, not the moralistic nature of it, the mechanical nature of it. That it's not that should happen or shouldn't happen, it's that it happens. It is. So to be a Christ-like servant of your spouse means to inhabit reality as such and to choose to be a student of your partner's needs. That I want to know what it is that you need. Because as a believer in God who accepts a biblical reality of marriage, I know I'm supposed to be a helper to you. Not Wade's opinion, God's opinion. That I'm to be your partner. It's not good to be alone. And so I want to know what it is that you need. Because I want to bless you. I want your life to be better because I was in it. I want your life, whatever it would have been, I want it to be so much better because God put me in your life. And I know that the only way I can do that is not just by doing whatever I want to do, but by learning what it is that you need from me. Because I want to bless you. Man, that goes so much against us. We think of it all about me. What I want, what I need, me. No! Partner, helper, I want to bless you. Now, an unbeliever could look at this and embrace it from a very pragmatic standpoint in this way. Someone who was here today who may totally not believe in God or Christianity, fine, could affirm everything I'm saying by acknowledging this, that either you become a student of your partner's needs or you are inviting someone else to. Right? You can have it either way. God's given you freedom, but it's your choice. Take religion and spirituality out of it. Set your partner loose in the world with a vacuum of need, emotional, physical. At your own risk, set them loose in the world. Test Aristotle. Test the iron law that needs get met, that I have seen affirmed and affirmed and affirmed and affirmed 18 years of ministry, that needs get met. Or you could take what I consider to be a much better view of it than just the view that that's reality and I should be afraid of that and pragmatically I should avoid it, but that as a believer that this is an opportunity I want, don't have to, I want to be a servant to the joy of my spouse. This person that God's given me to do life with so that I'm not alone, to walk through this one life that I get one shot at it. I want their life to be not ordinary, I want it to be extraordinary. What if on my tombstone my wife said, "He made my life extraordinary"? What if she ignored what I asked for it to say, like he was really handsome and strong and brilliant, but instead of all those things, she said, "He made my life better than it ever could have been. He blessed me every day. He made my life extraordinary to the best of his ability." As a Christian, if you have a servant point of view to be a helper, then that's not something you do begrudgingly in kind of a have-to world. No, that's a get-to world. I remember seeing a toddler one time interacting with the parent. And the parent had something in their hands that the toddler wanted. And the toddler didn't have the words to say, like didn't have a full, complete sentence. And so I noticed the toddler just kept saying, "Me want, me want." And was reaching for it, "Me want, me want." And I was thinking, that's more descriptive of adults than it even is of children. That a lot of it's like, me want, what I want to do tonight, not what you want to do tonight. What me want to do today, what me want to do this week, what me doesn't want to do. Isn't that our human nature? Is there a solution to that other than a transformational encounter with Jesus Christ? If there is, tell me about it. I haven't discovered it. But out of that transformation can come a desire to bless my spouse that is more of a get to than a have to. I'm not talking about duty, although there's truth in that. That's in the ordinary, best case scenario of the ordinary. In the extraordinary, I'm not talking about duty, I'm talking about desire. A desire to bless that person. Paul talks about this. Might surprise you. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, if you open up your Bibles, if you have one, take a look at this. That Paul, long before me, was onto this whole iron law business. He had this all figured out. All right? So you may be skeptical of me, but maybe not so much of Paul. So take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and look at this. And see if Paul didn't say 2,000 years ago, holy moly, the very thing that I'm saying right now. This section on directions about being married, he's writing to the church at Corinth. Someone had asked him a question about physical intimacy, and he's answering it. Now, concerning the matters about which you wrote me, because someone had written him and said, "It is well for a man not to touch a woman." Someone had written that to Paul, and so he's writing back. And he says, "But because of cases of sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband." All right? The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. Now that has spawned a million jokes. I'm aware of that. All right? But I'm going to let you tell your own in your head to keep me out of trouble, okay? "For the wife does not have authority over her own body." This is kind of a radical thing to say in our American world, that I don't have the right to my own body. "The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And look at how egalitarian Paul is in this, unlike the way he's been painted. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. And in these words, do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement, two people agree, for a set time to devote yourselves to prayer. And why shouldn't we deprive each other? And then come together again so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now, I can't say it that eloquently, but I can say it in less words, 3 words. All right? Anybody know what they are? Needs get met. Paul was an astute observer of reality. And he understood that nature does abhor a vacuum, and that even where that vacuum is blocked by moral compunction and virtue and value and willpower and all the things that might build a wall blocking that vacuum being filled in an inappropriate way, he understood that we're not God. All right? And he understood the difference between something being the reason for something and something justifying something. He's not saying it's justified. He's not saying it's not sinful and evil and immoral to act outside of marriage in adultery. But he's saying, let's also be wise. And that what explains something certainly doesn't justify it, but we can be wise enough to see that nature abhors a vacuum. He understood that iron law, that needs get met. I want us to consider a book that's a great book by Willard Harley. He wrote a book years ago called The Affair-Proof Marriage. And it was based on his ministry with people over a long period of time. And what he came up with was that the issue in most marriages isn't what you see on TV, communication. That's a symptom. That the real issue is always needs. Are needs being met in the marriage, or are they going to be met outside the marriage? You decide. That was his approach. You decide. Are they going to be met in or out? And he wrote that there are 5 basic needs that women and men have. This doesn't cover everybody. You're probably the exception to the rule. But for most of us, here's what they are, he says. The areas of emotional need for a female in the marriage are identified this way: affection, intimate conversation, honesty and openness, financial support, which is security, and family commitment. All right? Maybe those don't mean anything to you ladies, but most that I've met would say those are important. Affection, intimate conversation, honesty and openness, financial support, family commitment. Now, might surprise you that men aren't exactly the same, right? Does that surprise you guys? That for men, critical emotional needs are defined as sexual fulfillment, recreational companionship, also known as college football, right? Physical attractiveness, domestic support, and this is so true, admiration. To feel like your spouse is proud of you and has that admiration is like, for a man, is like, everything. And underlying all that was his reality of the iron law of marriage. Needs get met. And I think what God is saying to us, what Paul was saying to the church of Corinth, is that look, don't invite Satan into your life. Don't lay out a welcome mat and say, come on in. Come on in and ruin everything we've got. Don't leave the door open. Lock the door and double lock it and triple lock it by making sure that fulfillment is found within the walls outside rather than outside the walls. Here's how that looks. In our little Methodist world we live in, we believe in practical theology. How do we put this into action? So I'm always thinking about it in those terms. Here's what it looks like. This afternoon, tomorrow, over a cup of coffee or iced tea or whatever it is, to sit down with your spouse with a pen in hand and a piece of paper and to say, I want to know what your needs are because I want to be the man that meets them. I want you to look at me and say, that is the man who meets my needs, who cares about them, who asks about them. And men, maybe somewhere in your heart that stirs a desire you may have forgotten. about wanting to be a knight in shining armor. It kind of stirs that in me. I know it's a little cheesy. I'm sorry. But to say to your spouse, and being from me to Julia, I want to know what your needs are because I want to be the man that meets them. I want to bless you. I don't want your life to be ordinary. I want it to be extraordinary. My definition of marriage isn't staying married. It's having a mountaintop marriage. What Jesus calls abundant life. And to sit down and have that discussion, you want to talk about rare air? You want to talk about 1% of 1% of people? That committed and that emotionally astute and intelligent to sit down and say, you know what? Let's look at what Paul says here. Let's look at what he says here. I'm not my own. I'm yours. And that works if you're not your own and you're mine. What is it that you need? Because I want to bless you. May God use me to bless you. That you and I together, to his glory, can have a mountaintop marriage.